It's funny how a single act, meant as a kindness, can become a weapon. How a person who claims to love you can, with one thoughtless gesture, detonate your entire world. My sister, Megan, always thought she was helping. She'd offer unsolicited advice on my clothes, my career, my life, always with a condescending little smile that said she knew better. But the help she gave me last month, well, that was different. That one act of help leveled 20 years of my life, reduced my greatest passion to landfill dust, and in the process, accidentally made me a millionaire. She just doesn't know it yet. She also doesn't know that the eviction notice she'll be receiving next week will be signed by her new landlord. For as long as I can remember, my life has been lived in the shadow of my older sister. I'm Jenna. For 20 years, I was a collector, a curator, some might say a fanatic. My passion was rare comic books. Not the flimsy things you see on a spinner rack at the drugstore, but artifacts of pop culture history. The crisp, vibrant pages of the Silver Age. The gritty, groundbreaking stories of the Bronze Age. Each one was sought, purchased, and preserved with an almost religious devotion, and stored them in archival quality bags with acid-free boards, nestled in dozens of white, tomb-like long boxes that lined an entire wall of my office. This was my art gallery, my museum. To Megan, it was my childish hobby. She lived with me in the 2-bedroom house I rented, a situation that was supposed to be temporary after her last business venture. A disastrous attempt at being a lifestyle brand consultant imploded, leaving her with a mountain of debt and cratered credit. That was 5 years ago. She saw my collection as an embarrassment, a juvenile fixation that was taking up valuable space. Honestly, Jenna, she'd say, leaning against the doorframe of my office, a glass of wine in her hand. When are you going to grow up? These are for children. You're almost 40. Don't you want a real person's hobby, like yoga or brunch? I never argued. What was the point? Explaining the cultural significance of Jack Kirby's art or the revolutionary narrative of Alan Moore's work to Megan would be like trying to describe color to someone born blind. She didn't see the stories, the history, the investment. She saw clutter. She saw something she didn't understand. And Megan's response to anything she doesn't understand is mockery. My passion was a steady, quiet thing. Hers were loud, fleeting, and always ended in failure that I, the responsible younger sister, was expected to help clean up. I paid the majority of the rent. I covered the utilities when her freelance checks were delayed. I was the stable bedrock on which she could build her chaotic life. And in return, she treated my life's work like a joke. The call came when I was in Chicago for a week-long data analytics conference. It was a big deal for my career, a chance to network and solidify my position at my firm. The trip was my focus. I barely thought about home. On the third day, Megan called me, her voice syrupy with a kind of triumphant pride that always set my teeth on edge. "Jenna, I have the most amazing surprise for you when you get back," she chirped. I got a burst of energy and decided to tackle the house. "I've been decluttering all day. You won't believe how much space we have now." A cold dread, slick and immediate, washed over me. I stood in the bustling lobby of the convention center, the noise of 1,000 conversations fading into a dull roar in my ears. "What do you mean, Megan? What space?" "Your office, silly. It was so cramped with all those boxes. I took care of it for you. Finally, you can actually use that room for something useful now. Maybe a home gym, or I could set up my vlogging studio in there." The phone felt slick in my palm. My breath hitched. "Megan, what did you do with the boxes?" "I threw them out, of course. It took forever, by the way. Those things were so heavy. The garbage men were not happy, but I gave them a nice tip." "You should have seen the look on their faces," she laughed, a sound that was suddenly the ugliest thing I had ever heard. "You owe me big time, but it's my treat. A little welcome home gift from me to you." I don't remember hanging up. I think the phone just slipped from my hand and clattered onto the polished marble floor. My world tilted. 20 years, 2 decades of careful searching, of saving every spare dollar, of late nights spent cataloging, of the sheer joy of finding that one missing issue. A complete run of the new Teen Titans from the 80s, all in near mint condition. An almost perfect copy of giant-size X-Men #1. Dozens of key issues, first appearances, iconic covers, all of it, gone. Thrown away like yesterday's newspaper by a person who couldn't see the difference. She thought she was clearing out trash. She had no idea she had just thrown a winning lottery ticket into a landfill. A ticket worth $1.2 million. That was the appraisal value from just 1 month prior. An official, notarized, photographically documented appraisal I had commissioned for my homeowner's insurance policy. A policy that Megan, in her infinite, dismissive wisdom, knew nothing about. She thought she had destroyed my childish hobby. She had no idea she had just handed me the keys to a new life. A life where she would no longer be a resident. A life where I held all the cards. In that moment of shattering loss, a new resolve began to crystallize from the wreckage. She was about to find out that her act of helping had just made me her new landlord. The flight home from Chicago was a blur of silent, simmering fury. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep, too profound for tears. It felt less like sadness and more like a physical injury, a hollowed-out space in my chest where my passion used to be. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the white long boxes stacked neatly against the wall, a monument to 2 decades of my life. And then, I'd see them again, tumbling end over end into the grimy, gaping maw of a garbage truck. The legacy of my love being crushed alongside coffee grounds and empty milk cartons. When I finally walked through the front door, the house was eerily clean. Megan was standing in the kitchen, beaming, a triumphant look on her face, like she just single-handedly won a war. "See," she said, gesturing around the spotless living room. "Isn't this so much better? It feels like we can breathe in here." I didn't answer. I walked past her, my suitcase rolling silently behind me, and went straight to my office. The door was open, where my collection had once stood, a proud library of sequential art. There was just a blank wall. The carpet was vacuumed. The air smelled of lemon-scented cleaner. It was sterile, empty, an open wound in the heart of my home. Megan had even bought a ridiculous, oversized yoga ball and put it in the corner, where the first box, the one containing my most prized Silver Age books, used to be. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the nothingness. I could feel Megan's presence behind me, her smug satisfaction radiating like heat. "I told you," she said, her voice softening into a tone of faux concern. "It's a relief, right? To have all that baggage gone." I turned to face her. My own voice, when it finally came out, was raspy, alien. "They're gone, Megan. All of them." "Well, yes," she said, laughing lightly. "That was the point. It's called decluttering, Jenna. Marie Kondo. You should read her book. It's life-changing. You threw away 20 years of my life." Her smile faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. They were just comic books. You can probably buy them again on the internet if you're that desperate." And that was it. That was the moment the grief inside me began to cool and harden. It wasn't just that she had done it. It was that she couldn't even begin to comprehend what she had done. The utter lack of empathy. The casual, dismissive wave of her hand as she erased my identity. It was a pattern, I realized, that had been repeating itself my entire life. I was suddenly 10 years old again, standing in our childhood backyard. I had saved up my allowance for 6 months to buy a special edition Starfire action figure. It was my favorite. It came with a display stand and interchangeable hands. I kept it in its box, pristine. One afternoon, I came home from school to find Megan and her friends playing in the sandbox. They were using my Starfire figure as a shovel. Her hair was matted with sand, one of her arms was bent at a sickening angle, and the box was torn to shreds. When I started to cry, my mother came out. I tried to explain, to tell her how important it was, how long I had saved. My mother just sighed, picked up the broken toy, and handed it to me. Jenna, it's just a doll. Megan was just playing. Don't be selfish with your things. Your sister is older. You have to learn to share. Megan, standing behind my mother's legs, gave me a tiny, triumphant smirk. It was the same smirk she had on her face now. My things were not important. My feelings were an overreaction. My passions were childish. Her whims, however destructive, were to be accommodated. I was the family scapegoat, and she was the golden child, who could do no wrong. Years later, when we decided to get this house together, it was the same story, just with higher stakes. Megan had sweet-talked our parents into giving her a significant sum of money for one of her business ideas, which she promptly lost. Her credit was non-existent. No landlord would rent to her. But I, with my stable job and my meticulous credit score, was a perfect candidate. We can be roommates, just like when we were kids, she'd said, conveniently forgetting that when we were kids meant she broke my things and I got in trouble for it. I co-signed the lease. I paid the security deposit. And for 5 years, as her freelance income ebbed and flowed, mostly ebbed, I was the one making sure the rent was paid on time. I was the one who bought the groceries when her card was declined. I was the one who lived a frugal life, funneling my spare cash into my childish hobby, while she bought expensive clothes and went to trendy restaurants, posting it all on social media with hashtags like #bossbabe and #livingmybestlife. The house, this very space where my life's work had been executed, was only possible because of my responsibility, and she had used the security I provided to destroy the one thing that was truly mine. The memory that truly sealed my resolve, however, was from just a month before the trip. It was the day of the appraisal. I'd found a man named Arthur Vance, a retired museum curator, who now ran a small specialist appraisal service for collectibles. He wasn't some slick, fast-talking dealer. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes and hands that moved with reverence. He came to the house and spent an entire day going through my collection, box by box. Megan had been home that day. Of course, she'd made a big show of it, scoffing from the doorway. "You're actually paying someone to look at your cartoons," she'd said to me, loud enough for Arthur to hear. Arthur hadn't flinched. He'd looked up from a pristine copy of Werewolf by Night, #32, the first appearance of Moon Knight, and gave her a polite, cool smile. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and steady, "your sister doesn't have cartoons. She has a curated history of 20th century American mythology. This collection is one of the most complete and well-preserved private collections I've seen in a decade." Megan had just rolled her eyes and walked away, but I saw a flicker of something in her expression. It wasn't understanding. It was annoyance, as if Arthur's validation of my hobby was a personal insult to her. He validated me, and therefore, he invalidated her worldview, where she was the sophisticated one, and I was the child. After he was finished, Arthur sat me down at the kitchen table. He handed me a thick, spiral-bound report filled with photographs, grading notes, and market comparisons. The final page had a number on it, a number so large I thought it had to be a typo. $1,214,550. "Is this real?" I had whispered, hand trembling slightly as I pointed to the figure. "It's a conservative estimate, based on current auction records," Arthur said. "You have multiple key issues here, Jenna. Complete runs of major titles in near-mint condition are exceedingly rare. This isn't a hobby. It's a portfolio. That's why I strongly recommended the insurance rider. A collection like this needs to be protected." Standing in the empty office, staring at the blank wall, Arthur's words echoed in my head. Protected. I had protected the comics from sunlight, from moisture, from creasing, from time itself, but I had failed to protect them from my own sister. I walked out of the office and back into the kitchen. Megan was scrolling through her phone, already bored with my lack of a grateful response. "I'm going to go get some air," I said, my voice flat. "Okay, whatever," she mumbled, not looking up. "Don't be long. I was thinking we could order Thai to celebrate the new, improved house." I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I got in my car and drove to a small park a few miles away. I sat on a bench and watched the sunset. The grief was still there, a massive, aching void. But something else was there now too. A cold, clear, and quiet fury. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. At that moment, it was about justice. It was about consequences. My entire life, Megan had faced no consequences for her actions. Her failures were cushioned by our parents, or by me. Her cruelty was dismissed as a personality quirk. Her disrespect was framed as my oversensitivity. My phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Where are you? I'm hungry. Did you forget to pay the internet bill? It's not working." And in that instant, reading that monumentally selfish, oblivious text, the switch flipped. The dam of a lifetime of resentment finally broke. It wasn't about justice anymore. Oh no, it was about revenge. A very specific, very quiet, and very, very profitable revenge. I pulled out my phone and found the number for my insurance agent. Then, I found the number for Arthur Vance. The plan began to form, not in a rush of angry thoughts, but in a slow, meticulous assembly of facts. She thought she had thrown away my past. She had no idea she had just financed my future. A future that I promised myself, right then and there, would not include her. It wasn't about the money, it was about the respect. But the money, I realized with a grim smile, was going to be an exquisite tool. The first phone call I made was to my insurance company. My hands were shaking, not from sadness anymore, but from a strange, cold adrenaline. I half expected to be laughed at, to be told that no one would believe such a bizarre story. I was connected to a senior claims adjuster named Carol, a woman with a no-nonsense voice that sounded like it had been permanently sharpened by years of dealing with fraud. "So let me get this straight, Miss Miller," she said, after I'd laid out the basic, horrific facts. "Your sister, who lives with you, threw out your personal property, which you are claiming is worth over $1 million. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "That's correct." There was a long pause. I could hear her typing. "And you expect us to cover this? An act committed by a resident of the household. That often falls under a policy exclusion, you know." Here it was, the first hurdle. But I was prepared. Arthur had prepared me. "If you check my policy," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, "you'll see, I have a specific, scheduled personal property rider for a collectibles collection. It was added 6 weeks ago. It covers accidental loss, damage, and destruction, regardless of the source, up to the appraised value. The appraisal was conducted by a certified expert, and the full 80-page report was submitted to your underwriting department at the time the rider was added." Another, longer pause. The sound of typing became more frantic. "Let me see. Yes, here it is. Arthur Vance appraisals. Dated April 12th. Total appraised value, $1.214 million. The skepticism in her voice had evaporated, replaced by a note of stunned surprise. "Good Lord, what was in this collection?" 20 years of my life," I said softly. "But more specifically, key issues from the Silver and Bronze Age of American comics, all professionally graded and documented in that report. We'll need a police report, of course," she said, her tone all business now. "For a claim of this size, it's non-negotiable." "Of course," I replied. "I'll file one this evening. For destruction of private property." The thought of filing a police report against my own sister sent a sick jolt through me. But it was a necessary step on this new, unlit path. It was no longer a family squabble. It was a legal transaction, a 7-figure transaction. My second call was to Arthur. I caught him just as he was closing up his small shop, a place called the Collector's Archive, that was more museum than store. When I told him what had happened, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "Jenna," he finally said, and his voice was filled with a genuine, aching sorrow that I hadn't even received from my own family. "I have no words. That is a tragedy, a cultural crime." Hearing him say that, hearing my loss validated by the one person who truly understood its scope, was like a release valve on my soul. "She called them cartoons, Arthur. She said she was decluttering." "Some people," he sighed, are incapable of seeing value in anything that doesn't directly benefit them. Their world is very small. I am so sorry. He then became my staunchest ally. Carol from the insurance company will likely call me to verify the appraisal. I'll make sure she understands. This wasn't a loose pile of magazines. It was a meticulously curated asset. I have high-resolution digital scans of every key book and every long box's inventory list. I will send them to you and to her. We will leave no room for doubt. He was better than his word. Over the next few days, he became my rock. He was the voice of reason I didn't know I desperately needed. While Megan was at home, alternating between ignoring me and making passive-aggressive comments about my moodiness, I was quietly assembling a fortress of documentation with Arthur's help. He told me about his own struggles, a little bit at a time. His shop, which he'd run for 30 years, was in a building that had just been bought by a massive, faceless real estate corporation. They were doubling his rent, trying to force him out to put in a chain coffee shop. They see a dusty old store, he said, a note of weary frustration in his voice. They don't see the community that meets here. They don't see the history we preserve. It's the same blindness your sister has, Jenna, a lack of imagination. His story planted a seed. It was a small, dark seed of an idea that I didn't examine too closely at first. It felt too audacious, too predatory, but it lingered. The police report was the hardest part. The officer who took my statement, a young man with a bored expression, looked at me with open disbelief. So your sister threw out your comics, and you're saying they're worth $1 million? $1.2 million, I corrected him, handing him a copy of Arthur's appraisal summary. His eyes widened as he scanned the paper. The boredom vanished. He started taking things much more seriously after that. He had to go to the house to interview Megan. I wasn't there for it, but Megan called me later, absolutely livid. A police report, Jenna? Are you insane? You called the cops on me, on your own sister? What is wrong with you? They were just comics. I told them you were having some kind of mental breakdown after your trip. It's for the insurance, Megan, I said calmly. It's just a formality. Insurance? What insurance? For what? $10,000? 20? You are blowing this so far out of proportion. You're trying to ruin my life over this. Mom and Dad are going to hear about this. Of course they were. The call from my mother came an hour later. It was a masterclass in guilt and manipulation. Jenna, honey, what are you doing to your sister? She called me in tears. A police report? She was only trying to help you. The house was a mess with all those boxes. You know how much she values a clean space. You're being cruel. Mom, she threw away something that was incredibly valuable to me, I said, my grip on the phone tightening. Valuable in what way? Sentimental value? Honey, you're a grown woman. You can't let your whole life be ruined by some old magazines from when you were a kid. Megan is your family. She is your blood. You need to apologize to her for scaring her like that, and let this go. It's for the good of the family. For the good of the family. That phrase, I realized, had always been code for the good of Megan. My feelings, my passions, my property, they were all expendable for the sake of keeping the golden child happy and comfortable. It was in that moment that any lingering guilt I felt about my plan completely evaporated. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource, a support system for Megan. They weren't my family in any meaningful way. They were her enablers, and I was done. I have to go, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Don't you hang up on me, Jenna. This isn't over. Your father and I are extremely disappointed in your behavior. I ended the call. It felt like severing a rope that had been around my neck for my entire life. The next 2 weeks were a strange, quiet war. I stayed in my room most of the time, working on my laptop. I spoke to Megan only when absolutely necessary, giving one-word answers to her questions. I stopped covering her share of the utilities. I stopped buying groceries for the house. When her favorite brand of expensive oat milk ran out, she was personally offended. Aren't you going to the store? She asked, staring at the empty carton on the counter. I already went, I said, not looking up from my book. And you didn't buy my milk? I bought my milk, I replied. You can buy your own. She stared at me as if I'd just sprouted a second head. The panic was just beginning to flicker in her eyes. The system was breaking down. The support structure she had taken for granted was crumbling, and she had no idea why. Meanwhile, the insurance claim was moving forward with surprising speed. Carol, the adjuster, was now my advocate. Armed with Arthur's detailed report, the police filing, and my own meticulous records, she pushed the claim through the bureaucracy. She called me one Tuesday afternoon. "Miss Miller," she said, and I could hear a smile in her voice. "The board has approved the final payout. Given the comprehensive documentation, there's no dispute. The check will be issued and sent via courier. You should have it by the end of the week." I felt a wave of dizziness. The full amount, $1,214,550, minus your $500 deductible. Congratulations, Miss Miller. I hope this brings you some closure. Closure. It was more than that. It was ammunition. That afternoon, I went online and looked up the property records for the house I was living in. The house I was about to be kicked out of. If Megan's escalating hostility was any indication, it was owned, as I knew, by an older man, a Mr. Harrison, who had inherited a few rental properties and managed them himself. I remembered him mentioning a few months ago, when he'd come by to fix a leaky faucet, that he was getting tired of the work and was thinking of selling up and moving to Florida to be with his grandkids. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I found his contact information. I took a deep breath. Arthur's story about his own landlord echoed in my mind. The dark little seed of an idea began to sprout. I wasn't just going to get my own place. I was going to get this place. I was going to turn my sister's act of destruction into an act of acquisition. It was time to make my first move. The check arrived on a Thursday morning in a crisp, nondescript courier envelope. I was home alone, as Megan was out at one of her networking lunches, which usually meant she was trying to find a new person to fund her next bad idea. I signed for the package and took it to my room, closing the door softly behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed and sliced the envelope open with a letter opener. Inside was a single piece of paper, a cashier's check from the insurance company, made out to Jenna Miller. The number in the little box felt unreal, like a phone number, $1,214,050. I stared at it for a full 5 minutes. I didn't feel a rush of joy or excitement. I felt a profound, chilling calm. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock, of a door swinging open to a future I had never imagined. This piece of paper wasn't just money. It was power. It was independence. It was the final, definitive answer to every time Megan had mocked me, every time my parents had dismissed me. This was the value of my childish hobby. The first thing I did was take a picture of the check on my phone and then drive to the bank. Not my usual branch, but a larger one downtown, where I had made an appointment with a private wealth manager. Opening the account felt like stepping into a different life. The way the manager spoke to me, the respectful tone, the immediate attention, it was a world away from the casual condescension I was used to. I deposited the check, an act that felt both monumental and strangely mundane. The money was now just a number on a screen, but it was a number that changed everything. The next day, I called Mr. Harrison, our landlord. He sounded tired when he answered the phone, but his voice brightened when I told him who I was. "Jenna, my best tenant. I hope there's no trouble with the house." "No, not at all, Mr. Harrison," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Everything is fine. Actually, I was calling for a different reason. I remember you mentioning you were thinking of selling the property." He sighed. "The thought crosses my mind every day, Jenna. It's a lot of work for an old man. The taxes, the upkeep. Why do you ask? Are you thinking of moving?" There was a note of disappointment in his voice. "Quite the opposite," I said. "I'm interested in buying it from you." If you were willing to consider a private sale. There was a moment of silence. Well, I certainly consider it. It would save me the headache of listing it and paying a realtor's commission. But I'd need to get a fair market price for it, you understand. Of course, I said. I had already done my research. Zillow and Redfin estimated the house was worth around $750,000 in the current market. I've been looking at the property values in the neighborhood. I would be prepared to offer you $825,000 in cash. We could close in 2 weeks. I heard him draw in a sharp breath. The offer was significantly over market value, a number designed to be irresistible, to ensure a quick, quiet transaction with no complications. It was an aggressive move, but I had the capital to be aggressive. $825,000, he repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. Cash? Jenna, are you serious? Completely serious, I said. I can have my bank send proof of funds to you this afternoon. Sold, he said, the word coming out in a half laugh of pure shock and delight. Jenna, you've just made my year. Yes, absolutely. Let's do it. The plan was in motion, while Mr. Harrison and my newly hired lawyer handled the paperwork for the sale. I began my own silent takeover at home. The change in our domestic finances was the first shot fired in a war Megan didn't even know was being waged. The first of the month came, and I paid my half of the rent directly to Mr. Harrison, as usual. But I didn't pay her half. A few days later, Megan stormed into my room, waving a piece of paper in her hand. It was a late notice from the landlord. What is this? She demanded. Mr. Harrison says the rent is short. Did you forget to pay it? I paid my half, I said, not looking up from my laptop. You're responsible for yours. Her jaw dropped. What are you talking about? You always cover it if I'm a little short. I'm not covering it anymore, I said. You're a grown woman, Megan. It's time you paid your own bills. She stared at me, her eyes a mixture of fury and genuine confusion. This was a violation of the unspoken contract that had governed our lives for years. I was the safety net. I was supposed to catch her. The idea that I would simply choose not to was incomprehensible to her. She sputtered for a moment, then stormed out, slamming the door. I knew she'd call our parents, and I knew they'd send her the money. For now, but the foundation was cracked. The next phase of my plan was a quiet exodus. Anna rented a small storage unit a few miles from the house. Every day, while Megan was out, I would pack a few boxes, not clothes or furniture, but the small things that made the house my home. My books, my favorite coffee mug, the framed photos from my desk, the quilt my grandmother had made for me. I was erasing myself from the house, bit by bit. It was a slow, methodical process, the reverse of the 20 years I had spent building my collection. Now, I was dismantling my life there. Megan was too self-absorbed to notice the small empty spaces at first. She was too consumed by her own mounting panic. Her car payment was due. Her credit card was maxed out. Without my silent subsidies, her carefully constructed facade of a successful influencer lifestyle was beginning to crumble. The panicked texts became more frequent. Shanna, I really need $200. My phone is about to get shut off. Can you please just cover my car insurance this one time? I'll pay you back, I promise. Shanna, why are you being like this? What did I ever do to you? That last one almost made me laugh. What did I ever do to you? The sheer, breathtaking lack of self-awareness was a marvel. She had taken a flamethrower to the most important thing in my life, and she couldn't fathom why I might be acting differently. She saw her act as a favor, and my reaction as a bizarre, inexplicable betrayal. The closing on the house was scheduled for a Friday. The day before, I packed my last 2 suitcases with my clothes and essential documents. The house felt hollow now, echoing with my absence even though I was still there. That evening, Megan tried a new tactic, love bombing. She made my favorite dinner, which she must have looked up on the internet, and opened a bottle of wine. I thought we could have a nice sister night, she said, her smile forced. Things have been so weird between us lately. I want us to get back to normal. There is no normal anymore, Megan, I said, standing in the kitchen doorway. Her face fell. Is this still about the comics? She asked, her voice turning whiny. I said I was sorry. No, you didn't, I replied flatly. You never said you were sorry. You said I was being dramatic. You said I should be thanking you. You told the police I was having a mental breakdown. Okay, well, I'm sorry, she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. There. Are you happy now? Can we please just move on? I can't take all this stress. I looked at her, at my sister, the person I had shared a home and a life with, and I felt nothing. The well of my affection had been completely poisoned. The emotional connection had been severed by the blades of the garbage truck's compactor. All that was left was the grim business of settling the account. I'm glad you're sorry, I said, my voice empty. I'm moving out tomorrow. The color drained from her face. What? Moving out? Where are you going? You can't just leave me here. I can't afford this place by myself. That sounds like a you problem, Megan, I said, turning and walking back to my room. Not a me problem. Not anymore. The next morning, I was gone before she woke up. I left my key on the kitchen counter, next to a single, fresh, late rent notice that had arrived in the mail for her. The silent takeover was complete. The house was now mine. She just didn't know it. The next phase was about to begin, and it wouldn't be silent at all. The first few days of my new life were spent in a state of suspended animation. I had moved into a sterile, temporary corporate apartment, a place with generic art on the walls and furniture that had been sat on by 100 other transient people. It was soulless, but it was also peaceful. My phone, which had once been a constant source of anxiety, was blissfully silent. I had blocked Megan and my parents' numbers the morning I left. I knew they would be trying to reach me, a frantic storm of calls and texts, but on my end, there was only quiet. It was the sound of a boundary being held for the first time in my life. I spent the time planning. I met with a contractor to discuss renovations for the house, not just cosmetic changes, but a complete reimagining of the space. I wanted to reclaim it, to wash away the memories of condescension and neglect. The office, the room that had been the site of the crime, would be the first to be transformed. I designed it to be a library, with floor-to-ceiling custom-built shelves, proper lighting, and a climate control system. A sanctuary, a place where my passions would be honored, not mocked. I also took a meeting with Arthur, my appraiser and unwitting mentor. We met at his shop, the Collector's Archive. It was a dusty, magical place, smelling of old paper and history. I told him the whole story, the insurance payout, the house purchase, everything. He listened patiently, his kind eyes watching me over the rim of his glasses. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. Remarkable, he said. It's a form of poetic justice I've only ever read about in comic books. It felt like the only move I had left, I admitted. She took my world, so I took hers. You didn't take her world, Jenna, he corrected me gently. You took back the world you had been funding for her all along. There's a difference. He then told me his own landlord situation had worsened. The new corporate owners had given him a final notice. He had 60 days to either agree to a 200% rent increase or vacate the premises he'd occupied for 3 decades. It was then that my subplot, the little seed of an idea his story had planted, came into full bloom. What if you didn't have to leave, Arthur? I asked. What if you owned the building? He gave a sad laugh. This whole block is owned by that real estate firm. They'd never sell to me. I couldn't afford it anyway. Corporations like that aren't sentimental, I said, the words coming to me with a new, sharp clarity I'd never possessed before. They're financial. They don't care about a single storefront. They care about profit margins and asset management. If someone were to make them an offer on this one building that was significantly above its assessed value, they might see it as a smart, quick way to liquidate a small, annoying asset. I leaned forward. I've been studying real estate investment trusts for the past week. It's just a different kind of collecting. Let me look into it. Let me see what's possible. For the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. My revenge wasn't just about punishing Megan. It was becoming a creative, constructive force. The inevitable confrontation came a week later. I was expecting a call from a blocked number or a hysterical email, but Megan chose a more direct approach. He showed up at my office. I was just finishing up a report when the receptionist buzzed me. "Jenna, your sister is here to see you. She seems upset." I took a deep breath. "Send her back." Megan burst into my cubicle, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. She was holding a letter in her hand, her knuckles white. It was an official eviction notice, issued by the new property management company I had hired. It gave her 60 days to vacate the premises due to a change of ownership. "What is this?" she hissed, slamming the letter down on my desk. "This is a joke, right? You're playing some sick joke on me." "It's not a joke, Megan," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "The house was sold. The new owner wants the property vacant." "Sold? To who? Why didn't Mr. Harrison tell me? I've been calling him and he won't answer his phone." She was near hysterical, her voice rising with each word. A few of my coworkers were starting to peek over the cubicle walls. "He probably won't answer because his business with the property is concluded," I said. "And as for who bought it, I did." The words hung in the air between us. Megan's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated rage. "You? How could you buy it? With what money? You don't have that kind of money." "It turns out I do," I said, my voice level. "Or rather, I did. A portion of it is now tied up in a real estate investment." She stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to put the pieces together. And then I saw the moment of sickening comprehension on her face. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open. "The comics," she whispered. "The insurance, that police report. You planned this." "I didn't plan for you to destroy 20 years of my work." "No," I replied, the ice in my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "But I did take advantage of the opportunity you provided. You wanted me to get rid of my childish things and get a grown-up hobby. Well, I did. My new hobby is property management. And you, Megan, are my first tenant, and my first eviction." It was then that our parents, the cavalry she had undoubtedly called, arrived. They must have been waiting in the lobby. My father, a man whose primary emotional state was a sort of blustering disappointment, and my mother, the master of passive-aggressive martyrdom. "Jenna, there you are," my mother said, rushing forward. "Megan told us this insane story. You need to stop this, right now. You are tearing this family apart." "This family," I said, standing up, "was torn apart a long time ago. It was torn apart every time you sided with her over me. Every time my feelings were dismissed, and her behavior was excused. This isn't me tearing the family apart. This is me simply stepping away from a structure that has been crushing me my whole life." "Over some magazines," my father boomed. "You're throwing your own sister out on the street over some old paper?" "I'm not throwing her out on the street," I said, my voice rising for the first time, not with anger, but with a fierce, burning vindication. "I am terminating a tenancy agreement for a property that I own. And it wasn't some old paper. It was a collection valued at $1.2 million. A collection that your precious golden child threw into a dumpster because she couldn't be bothered to respect anything that wasn't about her. She didn't just declutter, she destroyed a massive financial asset. The insurance company saw it that way. The police saw it that way. And now, the bank sees it that way. The only people who refuse to see the truth are the two of you, because you've spent her entire life protecting her from reality." They stared at me, all three of them, in utter stunned silence. The number, $1.2 million, had finally landed with the force of a physical blow. The scale of what Megan had done, stripped of all emotional context and reduced to a pure, brutal financial fact, was something their minds couldn't immediately process. Megan looked like she had been slapped. My mother put a hand to her mouth. My father's face went from red to a pale, sickly white. "You're a millionaire?" Megan finally choked out, the accusation and the jealousy warring in her voice. "Thanks to you, yes," I said, picking up the eviction notice from my desk and holding it out to her. The notice is legal and binding. A property management company will handle all future communication. You have 59 days left. I would suggest you start looking for a new place to live. And Megan, I added, my voice dropping to a quiet final whisper, I'd start by decluttering your own life. I watched as the weight of this new reality settled over them. The power dynamic of our family, a structure that had been fixed for 40 years, had not just shifted, it had been completely demolished. Megan was no longer the golden child. She was a liability, $1 million liability. My parents were no longer the arbiters of familial justice. They were the architects of this disaster, and they knew it. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. My mother just shook her head, looking back and forth between me and Megan, as if seeing us for the first time. The shock on their faces was my vindication. It wasn't triumphant or joyful. It was a cold, quiet, and deeply satisfying confirmation of what I now knew to be true. Their love had always been conditional, and I had finally failed to meet the conditions. The condition was that I had to be the family's shock absorber, its perpetual bigger person, its silent, uncomplaining support system. And I had just resigned. I walked past them, out of my cubicle, and towards the exit. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, 3 pairs of eyes that had looked past me my entire life, but were now, finally, seeing me clearly. The charade was over. The weight that I had been carrying for decades, the suffocating burden of their expectations and their dismissiveness, had been lifted. Dushin Sak, I walked out of the building and into the bright afternoon sun, and for the first time since I was a little girl, with a broken action figure, I felt completely and totally free. The 60 days that followed were a masterclass in desperation and denial. The family's noise, as I came to think of it, was relentless. It came in the form of emails from new accounts, since I'd blocked their old ones, voicemails left on my work phone from blocked numbers. They even tried to get to me through extended family, sending my cousins and aunts to plead Megan's case. The narrative they spun was a work of art. I was the cruel, vindictive sister, drunk on a sudden windfall of money, punishing poor, hapless Megan for a simple mistake. The $1.2 million figure was never mentioned, of course. It was always some old comics. Megan's messages were a chaotic mix of pleading, threats, and self-pity. You can't do this to me, Jenna. I'll be homeless. Is that what you want? Followed an hour later by I'm talking to a lawyer. You can't just evict your own sister. This is illegal. And then inevitably, please, I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. Just let me stay. I'll pay rent. I promise. My parents' messages were all about guilt. Your sister is not eating. She's a nervous wreck. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. This is what you're doing to your family. They tried to frame my actions, not as a consequence of Megan's, but as an unprovoked attack on the family unit. It was the same logic they had used my whole life. The person who finally reacts to the abuse is always painted as the one who starts the fight. My response to all of it was silence. I forwarded every email and a transcript of every voicemail to the property management company, as instructed by my lawyer. I replied to nothing. I engaged with no one. I was building a wall of professional detachment, brick by brick, and their emotional theatrics shattered against it, harmless. While they were panicking, I was building. The contractors began their work on the house the day after Megan's 60-day notice was up. Her moving out was, by all accounts, a disaster. She waited until the very last day, and my parents had to rent a truck and frantically pack her things themselves. The property manager did a walkthrough and sent me photos. She had left the place a mess, trash on the floors, angry scrawls in lipstick on a bathroom mirror. It was a final, impotent act of defiance. It cost me a few $100s for a deep cleaning crew, a tiny drop in the ocean of my new financial reality. Meanwhile, the subplot with Arthur was reaching its climax. My quiet inquiries into the real estate firm that owned his building had borne fruit. I formed a shell LLC, a tactic I'd learned from my late-night research to make an unsolicited offer on the small commercial building his shop was in. As I'd predicted, the offer, all cash, quick close, significantly above their internal valuation for a minor, non-strategic property, was too good for a faceless corporation to refuse. They saw it as found money. We closed the deal in less than a month. I invited Arthur to a coffee shop. I slid a folder across the table to him. Inside was the deed to the building, now owned by my LLC, and a new lease agreement for his store, the Collector's Archive. The rent was listed as $1 per year for the next 50 years. He stared at the paperwork, his hands trembling slightly. He looked up at me, his eyes shining. Jenna, why? Because you were the only person who saw the value in my collection, I said. You were the only one who didn't make me feel small for loving it. You treated my passion with respect. That's a debt worth repaying. Besides, I added with a smile, every good superhero needs a secret headquarters. He laughed, a real deep laugh of relief and joy. In a world where my own family had brought me nothing but grief, this man, a relative stranger, had become a true ally. Using the money born from an act of destruction to create an act of preservation felt like the most fitting end to that chapter of the story. The final confrontation, the true end of the story, happened about 3 months after the eviction. The house renovations were complete. The library was my sanctuary, the shelves still mostly empty, but filled with promise. I had started collecting again, slowly, deliberately. I had managed to track down and repurchase a high-grade copy of giant-size X-Men #1, the first jewel of my new collection. I was sitting in my new armchair, reading, when the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I saw them on the security camera feed on my phone. Megan and my parents, standing on my new porch. I took a deep breath and opened the door. They looked diminished. Megan had lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She was living with our parents now, and from what I'd heard through the grapevine, the reality of having their unemployed, financially irresponsible 42-year-old daughter living in their spare room was not the idyllic family reunion they had imagined. Jenna, my mother began, her voice pleading. Can we please just talk? There's nothing left to talk about, I said, not moving from the doorway. Yes, there is, Megan burst out, her voice cracking. I get it, okay? I screwed up. I screwed up in a way I can't even understand, but I'm your sister. You can't just cut me out. You can't just throw me away. The irony was so thick, I could barely breathe, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. That's an interesting choice of words. That's what you did to my life's work, Megan. You threw it away. You put it in the trash, without a second thought. Because it was inconvenient for you. Because you didn't value it. The only difference is, my collection was insured. Your safety net, which was me, was not. It wasn't about the money, Jenna, my father said, trying to take a different tack. It's about forgiveness. Family has to forgive each other. Did you forgive me when I was 10 and cried about my broken toy? No. You told me to be quiet and share. Did you forgive me for being upset about this? No. You called me cruel and told me I was tearing the family apart. Forgiveness, in this family, has only ever flowed in one direction towards Megan. You never asked her to respect me. You only ever asked me to endure her. The enduring is over. I looked directly at my sister. The rage was gone. The hurt was gone. All I felt was a vast, sad emptiness. You wanted me to grow up, I said. You were right. I needed to. I needed to grow up and realize that some relationships are toxic, no matter who they are with. I needed to grow up and build a life for myself that wasn't about propping up someone who despises me. So in a way, you did do me a favor. You pushed me out of the nest. You just didn't realize there was $1 million mattress waiting at the bottom. I stepped back and began to close the door. I wish you all the best, I said, and I meant it. I didn't wish them ill. I just didn't wish them anything at all. They were no longer a factor in my equation. Goodbye. I closed the door on their shocked faces, turned the deadbolt, and walked back to my library. The silence of the house was absolute. It was the silence of peace, the silence of a battle won, the silence of a new beginning. So here I am now, in my house, which is truly my home. I've spent the last few months not just rebuilding a collection of comics, but rebuilding a life on my own terms, governed by my own rules. The silence that my family found so cold and punishing is, for me, a source of immense peace. It's the quiet I need to hear my own thoughts, to enjoy my own passions, without judgment. Megan is still living with our parents. The golden child has returned to the nest, but the nest is no longer the comfortable perch it once was. Now she has to deal with the daily realities of living with parents who are finally seeing the consequences of a lifetime of enabling her. Their financial support isn't unconditional anymore. Their patience is wearing thin. They created the monster, and now they're stuck in the cage with it. It's a harsh form of karmic justice, but it's one of their own making. I hear they argue a lot. I feel nothing about this. It's their story now, and I'm no longer a character in it. As for me, I'm thriving. My work with Arthur's building has sparked a new interest. I'm taking courses in real estate law and finance. It turns out I have a knack for it. The same meticulous, detail-oriented nature that made me a good collector makes me a good investor. The money that came from the destruction of my old passion is now building a new one. Some of you watching this might think I went too far. You might say that she's my sister, that family is family, and that I should have forgiven her. Maybe you're right. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. Was it about revenge? In the end, I don't think so. It was about consequences. It was about establishing a boundary so clear and so absolute that it could never be crossed again. You can only turn the other cheek so many times before you realize you're just letting someone hit you from both sides. My story is a testament to a simple, powerful truth. Your passion has value, even if the people closest to you refuse to see it. Your work, your hobbies, the things that bring you joy and meaning. They are not childish or silly. They are the building blocks of who you are. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for loving what you love. Protect it, ensure it, if you can. And know that sometimes, the most profound act of self-love is walking away from the people who refuse to love you properly. The trash they throw out might just be your treasure, in more ways than one. So I have to ask you, what would you have done in my situation? Did I go too far? Or was it the only language my family would have understood? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all, and if you've been through something similar and want to hear more stories about people finally taking their power back, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.